right, so the first thing that we're going to do this evening is we want to hear a report from Miss Angela from her mission trip. And I do this each time we gather for one of those reports, but in Acts chapter 14, this is after Paul's very first missionary journey. The Bible says this, so they came back to their home church. After they arrived and gathered at church together, they reported everything God had done with them, and they had and that he had opened the door of faith to the Gentiles, and they spent a considerable time with the disciples, eating ice cream. It doesn't say that. We read that into it right there, and in our tradition is to have ice cream after missionaries have come home and we hear a report. But the reason why is because we believe that God he's a missional God. His heart is not just for me, it's for all the nations. There are people in this community, in our nation, and unreached people groups all over this world who he is trying to reach through us, through the local church. And so we are rejoicing in that, celebrating that, and tonight, the next thing we're going to do is you get to hear from Angela. So I'm going to let her share about her trip, and then we'll probably, when she's done sharing, we'll give you guys a chance to ask some questions, and then we'll switch the seats here a little bit, and we'll let Kelly come up, and she'll kind of update you on her process. So, Miss Angela, you want to start?
Okay, so I'll just start with a picture. So this is the team that I went with. So if you guys remember, I was connected to this trip through my best friend who goes to school down at SBU. So every year they take a trip down to the Amazon and they do physical therapy. And so I knew one person out of the 17 or so pictured here before I went, and by the end of the week it was hard to leave them. So the Lord is very kind and gracious in that we had a really good team dynamic, and we're all just ready to experience whatever the Lord had and serve the Lord in whatever way we could. And then there's also two of our translators on the very right. The two girls with the darker hair were translators that also we just got really close with and miss dearly. So yeah, and then I'm just gonna go day by day, pretty much through our trip. So our first day we traveled for a day and a half. And so we flew into Sao Paulo, Brazil, and then took another flight to Manaus. And Manaus was the city that we were starting in. So this is us in the city of Manaus. The first day, they planned for us to just get up, eat breakfast, and then we were going to go spend a little bit of time in the city before we got on the ship that evening. We were going to try to outwait the rain, but turned out it was not going to stop raining that day. So we basically walked through a downpour for a couple hours. We went to there's a street market, which very few vendors were open because of the rain, but we were able to get little handmade goods and stuff. We went to a grocery store. I bought some coffee, and just got to see the city, eat some street food. It was good. And then, so that night we went to a service at the church that sponsors this boat. Not sponsors, I think it's their boat. And so we went to a service and they gave us a little shout out, and then we were sent out to the boat. So they were parked in the port in Manaus, and we made our way onto there. So it's a metal boat. So we had quiet hours after a certain time because you can hear everyone's footsteps, everyone's talking. It just reverberates through the boat. It's a medical dental boat, and so they go on trips multiple times a month and go to different villages and offer these services, and then also whoever else joins them. So this week it was physical therapy they were able to offer, in addition to a doctor and dentistry. And so the first floor on the boat there is where the like clinic rooms are, and then there's like a couple rooms for the staff to sleep in, and like a kitchen on the back. And then that top floor is where all of the team's cabins were. And so they were basically like 4 bunk beds in a room, and it really wasn't too bad. They had air conditioners that then like were fanned into the room next to you. So a lot of people were actually freezing and wearing like multiple layers while trying to sleep, and then still waking up cold on the Amazon. And then the top deck there was just like a lookout deck. So we did some team meetings, prayer, and just enjoyed the beauty as we were either parked or even just moving down the river. So the first day I did triage with our medical team. So there's Carly Mon on the very right. She is a dentist, and then her mom came as her assistant. And then me, and then in the middle is Mata. She is kind of oversees all of the medical things. And then 2 more dentists, another nurse, and then our physician down on the bottom, and a dental student. So it was fun to be able to see like not only professionals that are like into their career, but also that students had a role in like all parts of the boat. So he is still in dental school, that student in the front, and so it was just cool to see that he's already able to see how he can serve with the gifts the Lord has given him and the education he's pursuing before he's even out of school. So, and then so every day we would park in a different village. The clinic would open, the villages were like notified ahead of time, and so people would just come to the boat as needed. And so this was a picture from, I want to say it's our first village that we were at, just so you can kind of see. The houses are very simple, made of wood. That one actually kind of looks like it has windows. It might be shutters, but they don't have like AC or anything really fancy. And then, so a lot of them had like this main part of the town that was like grassy. Here it has a soccer field, and then houses dispersed, but then there's also like jungle behind them that has people dispersed within it too. So in the morning the clinic would open, and then they would also send out teams to do evangelism and painting, because these wooden houses don't last very long if they don't have something on them to protect them. So this was just a picture of the group I went out with when we did evangelism. The evangelism was led by the pastor of the ship and his wife. They spend most of their time on this boat and forming connections with people in the community, and then connecting those people to their pastor in the community if there is one. And if there isn't one, then they train up new believers to help lead their church. And then here's a little before and after shot of one of the houses we painted that day also. So they said it adds like 5 to 10 years, probably even more, to the lifespan of these houses to add paint on them. So we were sweating out in the Amazon doing that. It was pretty brutal when you had to paint, but it was fun. Here's a picture from one of the towns that we were able to visit. This was their first time actually stopping in this village. And so we just kind of gathered on the shore. The boat like pulled into the sand, and then it was just a hill up. And so in the afternoons, they would do VBS, women's meetings and men's meetings, and basically just call whoever wanted to come to join. Sometimes there were a bunch of believers or a mix. We didn't really know who was coming. And so you can see at the bottom there was the men's group, and then further up the hill was the women's group. And this day I actually got to share my testimony with the women's ministry, which was really cool, and something that the Lord had kind of put on my heart that morning, having heard just a lot of the similar struggles that I walked through in my life, and someone from the community had shared, like, that's what teenagers struggle with here, is the temptation to do drugs and drink alcohol and like end up not really doing anything with their life. So I got to share my testimony then, and another Brazilian woman that was with us on the boat also shared hers, and it was really cool to see how the Lord just worked that situation out to like make this one cohesive thrust towards him and away from the world, because we didn't plan ahead of time or anything, but like it flowed so nicely together. And so he was just gracious in that. And yeah, we had a good group of women there. And something that the pastor had shared with us was also that like they try not to go out and just ask people if they want Jesus, because the answer will be yes. Because most people, when they hear like, oh, you're going to hell, you're going to suffer, like, yeah, I'll take the get out of jail free card is kind of like the idea. And so they instead are trying to ask more probing questions of like seeing where people are, like, does Jesus actually affect your day-to-day life? Because that's actually what they want to see. They want to see disciples for Christ, not just proclamations. And so that was encouraging, and something that we kind of focused on when we met with these groups was encouraging the women and men towards living a life that looks like Christ rather than the world. And so that was a really, it was a good perspective that I hadn't thought of. In this town, we were actually there because they raised money. The missions team did. Not our missions team, but the one that we were joining with on the boat, raised money for them to have a well. So if you didn't know, all the water in the Amazon River pretty much supplies these villages with what they need, and it's not healthy water at all. It's very dirty. They actually, a lot of them will put water in jugs and freeze it to try to kill off the bacteria, and then that's how they drink it, but they can still get sick from it. And so they were able to get a well dug here. And so there's a picture there of Pastor Dusty and Pastor Yvonne drinking from it. And it was just a really sweet moment that we were able to join in this. There was a man that's been praying for this for like 60 years in the village that was able to be there, and it was just a really sweet time. This is just another photo of it, so you can kind of see more what the well looks like. It's very simple, just kind of a pipe out of the ground, but that's going to be a life source for the people in that village, and they're hoping to also reach kind of the indigenous people, that was hard for me to say, that live kind of back further out from the village with this, since it's clean drinking water. And then each evening we would have services with the communities, which was really beautiful to be able to hear preaching and worship in both Portuguese and English at the same time. One of the leaders on the trip would say, like, she came back because she really felt like she was experiencing heaven on earth every time she went, and I can easily see why, especially when we did worship like that. To just think about the Lord saying that every tribe and tongue will worship him one day, and to be able to have that, and it's like you don't even have to know what they're saying, but you can just feel it, like it's worship to the Lord, and it's really sweet. And then, so some of my favorite times on the trip were the morning times around breakfast. So this is like most of the people, the Brazilians and our team that were on the trip, and we're in our like cafeteria room. And so you can see there's like bench seats around, and then this was like someone had laid out stuff to sell, but typically that's where our breakfast food would be laid out. We'd make a line, we'd eat. They had cooks that cooked really great for us every single day and worked hard. But so after breakfast, we would get things cleaned up, people would go do dishes, and then we would have a devotional time. And so each day someone different spoke and shared from the Lord's word, and we would also worship. And so we were, again, singing in Portuguese and in English, and it was just beautiful to sit in this room, in this metal boat, and everyone just worship their hearts out. And it really was motivating to our days to just start out like that, and it was really sweet. Lastly, so we did that 5 days a week. We went to different villages. And so this was some of the stats they had shared with us, is that they have been running this boat for 40 years. Pastor Yvonne is the second pastor to do this ship. There was another man who did it for most of those years before him. And so they have had 40 years of ministry, and they have reached 300 villages along the Amazon River, which is less than 1% of the total villages there, which is crazy to think of. And they have planted 15 churches. They have big goals to increase where they have reached, because there are many, many lost people. There is, like, to some degree, Catholicism around there, but there's also a lot of witchcraft and things, because that's just what has reached there. And so there's 45,000 total villages along the Amazon, and there's 11,000 that have no church presence at all. That means regardless of denomination, there's nothing there. And so their goal is to reach out to some of those that haven't been reached. But it's harder and harder the further you get away from Manaus, because that's one of the main cities there, and then it just turns into all these villages. So they said there's a trend of, like, the further you get from Manaus, the less reached these people are. And so that's where them bringing in teams and donations actually helps them move further down and do things like dig wells and stuff to reach all of those unreached people. So, and then here's just a pretty picture.
Go back to the picture, it was like 3 pictures ago with everybody in the boat.
Yeah.
All right, so one question I have is, would I fit in that room?
No. We had most of the guys were like 6 foot or taller. Where's John?
So I couldn't go on this trip.
John is in the back. He's actually squatting down, so you can't see how low those ceilings are. John is like 6'7", and when he walked in the kitchen, he was like perpetually hunched over. He could not stand up straight. The upper rooms were a little taller, so I think he got some relief when he went to his cabin, or stood outside.
Yeah, that was my first thought when I saw that picture. My neck hurt.
It was funny because the Brazilians were a little scared of all the tall guys when they first got on the boat, because they're just naturally shorter. And then we had these guys that couldn't even stand up in the boat, and they're like tilting their heads down.
So we'll be thinking of a question if you have one, but one of the questions I want to ask is, so anytime you leave, what you're used to here in the comfort of where we live, and then you go outside of that, there's a different culture. And so maybe you could, speak to that, just kind of what you saw, like the difference in the culture. And then also, I think even when you get outside of like our version of Christianity, that you'll see different nuances in different cultures as well. So maybe if you could speak a little bit like to the cultural differences that you saw, and then some of the Christian nuances of that.
Yeah, I think the cultural differences actually spread into the Christian, which, yeah. But the biggest thing I saw was, in the very first day of the trip, they explained, like, Brazil is family-oriented. And so, like, that's why the couple that was leading our team with the Brazilians moved there and have stayed there and continue doing ministry there, is because they love it, and they have been welcomed so nicely. And something that struck me was, I wouldn't, it's hard, initially I was like, well, America is like family oriented. Like, I would say I'm a family oriented person. Like, a lot of people would. Like, I love my family. Like, you want to do things with your family. But for them, it's different. Their family is very important, but they also see everyone else around them as family. And so that is the way their family orientedness works. And so that is throughout culture. It's just how they approach people. And it was very evident in the way that, like, we couldn't even speak the same language as these people, and we felt so close to them by the end of the week, talking through charades and very broken English and broken Portuguese. And there was a girl that actually is Brazilian but grew up in the States, and she said the same thing about her Brazilian church that she was able to go to as a kid, is that even in America, the Brazilian church had just that different atmosphere about it, where she grew up and didn't have a distinguish, like, between her friends. She called them her cousins and thought no different of it, because they just see everybody as family.
Okay. I want to see if you guys have any questions about Angela's trip. Yeah, Callie, I saw your hand. What was your favorite food? Is that the question? All right.
My favorite food, they made this like rice milk cake thing that was really good. It was kind of like, I would compare it to a rose con leche. That's like a Spanish food, except it didn't have the cinnamon, but it was really good. And then also all the fruit that we were able to have there. We had like different fruit juices and fruits with every meal, and it was so good.
Miss Millie. So the question is, what medically were you able to do while you were on the trip? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, medically, I was able to do vitals and kind of assess why the patient was there, which is kind of akin to my job that I do now. And so I did that for the triage day, but they also wanted me to go out and see the village and stuff as well. They're like, we want you to come back, so you have to see what we're doing. So. Yeah, no, it was just like seeing why they were there, pretty much. Yeah, I don't actually know. I didn't ask, but on like the need for vaccinations and stuff like that. Yeah.
I think I saw Philip's hand next. What was the name of I didn't hear?
Oh,
the dog.
Thank you,
Oh,
Leewood.
the dog. There's a dog in the picture.
That dog is a stray, so it does not have a name. There were stray dogs everywhere. That's kind of just a thing in South America. Some people will take ownership of them, but a lot of them just kind of wander around, and a lot of our photos were photobombed by these random dogs.
So that's a little bit of a cultural difference.
Yeah.
Miss Andy, I saw your hand. What kind of
Animals?
Yeah. Animals did you meet? Besides the dogs? Oh,
I know. So honestly, thankfully, not too many, because that was one of my worries. But I did see a parrot, which was really cool. It flew into the window during VBS and started eating some of the fruit out of a bag that we had. We kind of had to shoo it away. But you would hear them like squawking around the villages and stuff. It was really neat. But some other people were trying to be a little bit more observant and find stuff, and I think they did, but I was blissfully unaware of the Amazonian animals. We also did, actually, we swam with pink dolphins, and because there's dolphins in the Amazon River for whatever reason, and they have this like 15-foot long fish that we got to like fish out of this tank they were holding him in. So there were some crazy ones.
Okay, Jonathan, I saw your hand next, and then Paul, I'll go to you after that. Jonathan, I'm sorry. Yeah, John, you be quiet. Jonathan. How many people work there full time? On the boat, you mean?
I have to think about it, because it kind of varies. There's a good group, like 5 or 7 of them that seem to go on like almost every trip. And then like the physician that was with us, he graduated med school, took his boards, and has just been on the boat for like close to the last year, I think he said. And so it kind of goes in spurts, but they have a good group of like 5 to 7 that are on most every trip. Like Mara, who runs the medical team, she's always there. And then the pastor, and then some of the crew, pretty much, the captains and everything, yeah.
All right, Paul. So other expectations that varied. So unmet expectations.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, happily, I did not see more wild animals. I don't know. I had this kind of like irrational fear that someone was just gonna like bring their child with an emergency to the boat. Luckily, that didn't happen. But also, like, I wasn't sure, and they weren't able to really like spell out how they were gonna use me as a nurse on the boat. And so I definitely feel like I could have done more, but I also don't know what the more would have been or how that would have fit into how they do things. So thankfully I wasn't called on for an emergency, but
John, I think I saw your hand next, and maybe a couple more after that.
What did they share with you, like, when you're going down the Amazon, you're unique as far as medical supply. For most that live along that area that they serve, how far of travel, if they need medical attention, would they have to go?
so I think the last village we were in, because we like went down and we came back, we were still 2 hours out from Manaus by boat. And so it's typically a couple hours, and we actually had people, the second to last, the one where we opened up the well, we had someone share that they came an hour by boat, just from whatever direction to get physical therapy. So people hear about the boat coming, and they will travel however far it takes.
All right. Oh man, I'm gonna have to make someone sad here. Let's see, Peggy. I'll go to Peggy, and then, okay, we'll see how quick these are. Miss Peggy.
Do they have schools in their villages for the kids?
Do they have schools in the villages?
I noticed a couple, but honestly, I don't think it's a big thing for them. So, yeah, because we were there in the middle of the day, and there were kids running around and coming to VBS and things, so, yeah.
Okay. And then Titus. What did you learn from the nursing experience?
Honestly, I'll just share this, I guess, but something I'm praying through is furthering my degree, because I also, like, I was used on the boat, but I also know I want to do more, and I noticed that even in my current job. So that's something you all can be in prayer with me, because I really don't want to go back to school, but functionally I cannot do more in my job than I already do without a larger degree, so.
Okay. I was going to ask something about that. Ed, I'm going to go to you last, and then yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned that there were 11,000 villages with a presence of a church. And I was wondering, when an effort is made to establish a church, how is that received by the folks here? Are they open to it? Are they opposed to it? There's a lot of competition with witchcraft and magic and all of it.
Yeah, so he was asking about kind of how the villages are whenever they go and a church is trying to be established, if they welcome it or not. And I'm not completely sure on it, but I know that they do start with evangelism and believers. They don't just walk in and say, hey, we're going to start a church. And so I think it's becomes a little more like grassroots then. And there is opposition for sure. We heard of the testimony of a guy who was following the Lord, and his mom told him to stop because she thought that he was going to become a Bible fanatic. And then he endured more suffering and got into wrong groups of people because of that. And so there is some pushback, and because they dabble in witchcraft and all those things, which I think is present in a lot of places, even the States, but we just don't call it out, or people don't recognize it as what it is.
All right, so my last question, you kind of already alluded to it. I was going to ask you how the Lord has led you through this trip, because we're all trying to seek out the Lord's will for our lives, and if that means further missions, further education, and you kind of already answered that question, but I just wanted to give you a chance again. How do you feel like the Lord is leading you through this? Are you thinking missions, short-term missions, or you mentioned school, and what might that mean? And because we do want to pray for you.
Yeah. I will say it's definitely been hard being back home. And this is like the hardest adjustment back that I've had thus far, going on different mission trips. And so that's something I'm kind of processing through with the Lord. But then also I'm like, Lord, if that's because you want me to do more or go somewhere, then okay. So I don't really know what that means. And again, with kind of thinking about furthering my degree, the Lord is welcome to pump the brakes, but that's kind of where my prayers and thoughts are now, which still involves years of being here. Yeah. But yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I want to pray for you here, and before I invite Kelly up, but like I said, we all want to be right in the middle of God's will. I think that part of that, that's how do you know what God's will is for your life? I think something we have to take into account are the abilities that God gives us. And Paul, he was a tent maker. You're not a tent maker. You're a nurse, and God has used that to open up doors for the gospel. So ability and then desire. Like God puts different desires in our heart, and that's kind of why I asked. Like some of us, I don't. My calling and desire is not so much like full-time missions or even like long-term, short-term missions. I would like to go, but my desire is to see people equipped and the church come around missionaries and to send them out. And so, I think we have to consider our abilities that God gives us, the desires that God gives us, and then open doors. So like you just said, like if he wants to shut the door on one thing, then that's fine. I've laid down my life to him. And so as you're thinking through, because God might not be calling you to go to Brazil, but he may be nudging your heart to go somewhere. And that's another reason why we do these things, is to raise your awareness. This is what God does. He nudges your heart to go and to consider going in different places to share the gospel. And it might be aligned with your abilities and your desires. And then if there's an open door, maybe you should go. Right? We're appreciative of you going, and we have been praying for you. I want to pray for you now, and then I'll invite Kelly up here. So let's pray. Father, thank you so much for Angela, and thank you for the witness that she is to your gospel. You have changed her heart. You have changed her life, and you called her to take the gospel to Brazil, and she was obedient, and she went. Lord, I pray that example, that it would multiply into our church, and that you would help us all to see where you're leading us with our abilities and our desires, and through open doors for us to go share the gospel. And Father, I pray for her as she's just asked for prayer about her future and possible open doors in furthering her education and skills, and even her desire to continue to be on the mission field. We just pray that you would lead her and that you would guide her through that. Lord, we love you and we thank you, and I pray these things in your son's name. Amen. All right. Thank you. All right.
I'm off. I also want to say thank you to you guys before I get off.
Yeah.
Just for all the prayers and support and financial giving and everything. It's just been really sweet. Last time I went with a team, and so I don't know, it just seems easier, and so it was a little scary to go by myself, but you guys really surrounded me, and so I thank you greatly for that.
We're proud of you.